Thomas Savidge is a research fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research, and David Grasso is a business analyst. Good morning, gents. Happy Friday. So, Thomas, your thoughts on the White House saying that the trade deadline is not critical?
Well, that's a great question, Krisha. It's really interesting to see, and it's kind of a continuation of some of that uncertainty. I feel like I frequently say that on this program is with that uncertainty, it's a will they, won't they? Will the deadline get pushed? And at least there's some clarity on that. But hopefully the deals get made sooner rather than later, and you cement in some solid plan for a trade deal, and that way people can plan around that and make adjustments accordingly.
Yeah, also at the White House briefing, Caroline Leavitt talking about the big, beautiful bill as well, saying that the tax cuts in the bill will increase the amount of money Americans will have in their pockets. Watch.
Families will see an average increase in take-home pay of more than $10,000 per year. Americans earning between $30,000 and $80,000 per year will see a 15% tax cut. Overtime and tipped workers will save thousands of dollars annually. And our amazing seniors will receive historic financial relief by reducing the tax burden on their Social Security benefits. Simply put, this bill is going to unlock the golden age of America.
A lot of optimism, obviously, coming from the White House, but taking the politics out of it, obviously, there's a lot to get through in terms of the Senate, where it is right now. But overall, David, what she's talking about, that's appetizing for millions of Americans out there to have more money back in their pockets after paying so much with inflation and rising prices that they've seen over the years.
Yeah, and I think all of us love tax cuts and love paying less in taxes. But fundamentally, the problem with the big, beautiful bill right now is exactly that. It's math. And a lot of the offsets that were planned were killed by the parliamentarian last week, or actually earlier this week. So there's going to be a very difficult balance to strike between people who don't want to cut Medicaid and people who are definitely jazzed about these politically popular tax cuts. And finding that balance before the July 4th deadline is going to be extremely difficult, Sean.
Well, President Trump is very much focused on growth, and another development here in a $490 million investment. General Electric Appliances is moving its washing machine production from China to Kentucky. The nearly $500 million project will create 800 new jobs and has the appliances company poised to rank as the biggest U.S. manufacturer of washing machines. So, Thomas, thoughts on this?
That's a really interesting move to see, and I think there's a lot of factors at play here. Of course, when you're thinking trade, you want to think the basics. Comparative advantage. Who can produce a good or service at the lowest cost? Now, when it comes to China, there's a lot of risk assessment that has to go in there. Unfortunately, China has a history of intellectual property theft, no respect for property rights generally. And so we're seeing in other areas, like, say, smartphone production, getting moved to places like India and South Korea because these companies can't trust China to respect their property rights. Now, that being said, it's a really interesting development. You love to see investment here. You love to see investment growth here in the States, especially in Middle America. And so from there, I'm pretty optimistic.
Yeah, we've seen companies making these moves here in the States domestically, but switching internationally to the Iran-Israel conflict, if I can, with you, David. Oil prices have remained steady amidst that conflict, although there are concerns that Iran could potentially block the Strait of Hormuz. Since the U.S. has become a major producer of oil as of late, and the president encouraging drill, baby, drill, we've heard that. Why would the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz be less impactful on the United States, let's say, versus 30 years ago?
Well, remember, even back when I was in college 20 years ago, we imported a lot of our oil. And since then, because of the shale revolution and because of increased production in places like Canada and Mexico, we are now North American oil independent. Notwithstanding, oil is one global price. So even though most of the oil that comes out of Iran and Saudi Arabia ends up in East Asia in places like China and Japan, if the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil passes through every day, gets choked up, it causes the price of oil to go up. But still, we're in a much better place than we were 20, 30 years ago, because while we might pay more at the pump, it's not a national security risk like it used to be.
All right, great breakdown there. That is David Grasso and Thomas Savidge. Enjoy your weekend, gentlemen. Thank you.
You too.